Hi everyone, it's Mr. Kearns bringing you the remote learning packet for weeks 3 through 4 read through. It's going to apply to Global2, Math, Forensics, and ELA10 this time. Alright, and the teachers and teachers' aides are Mr. Ian Diorio, Mr. Colvin, Ms. Kelm, Mr. Kearns, and Ms. Cindy for Forensics. Our emails are here. And if you're watching the video, you clicked on the link over here for P&W BOCES Fox Meadow. So the theme for this packet is Precursors and Effects of World War II and the Holocaust on the World. Now we've had some requests for some remote reading, so I just want to show you when the PDF opens, you can go to your drop-down window from View, choose Read Aloud, activate.
Objectives. To describe the causes and effects of Japanese imperialism and the Great Depression as precursors to World War II.
So you just heard the read aloud read you the objectives for the global studies portion of the packet. You can choose any of the text within the packet, like the directions, and the read aloud reader will read it to you.
Review the precursors to World War II by examining the images below and answer the questions that follow.
All right. It will be helpful to some students with the longer blocks of text. So for global studies, we're going to review the precursors to World War II by examining the images below and answer the questions that follow. This is part 1. European countries industrialized in the late 1700s and 1800s. You're going to see a chart here on the right with the natural resources and what they're used for with regard to industrialization. Alright, and the picture on the left is just to give you an idea of what it looked like at that time frame. The large chimneys and plumes of smoke pouring out of them. Right. First question is, what natural resources did European countries need to support the process of industrialization? So you're going to use the chart to help you answer that question. The definition for precursor, since it comes up a lot in this packet, is here below. The next page, World Empires and Colonies in 1914, just before the First World War. The map shows you major countries like the United States, France, England, Spain, etc., and Australia. We'll give some love to Australia here too. And it shows you the colors of the colonies that they controlled, okay? Oh, actually, Australia is a colony in this. It's a colony of England. If you look at the colors next to the flag, you'll see the corresponding countries that were controlled through imperialism by England, for example. England controlled Australia and India, these portions of Africa into South Africa, and it looks like all of Canada. Okay? So what you're going to do is read the hint down here before answering number 2. It tells you basically what I just said, but it also gives you a link to the CIA Flags of the World website if you're having trouble understanding which countries these flags represent. Okay? And you can mess with your view here and increase the percentage so that you can see these flags a little bit more clearly. So if you jump over to, let's say, 200%, scroll to the right, you can see the flags and the colors a little bit more clearly. So if you don't know what this flag is, you'll go to this link, which will bring you to the CIA website that tells you which flags correspond to which country. Here's Argentina, here's Australia, over here is Barbados, etc., etc. Okay, everybody? Where's the link? Here we go. So we're going to go back to the page width view and continue down. Question 2 says, what did European countries do starting in the mid-1800s to acquire more natural resources? Consider how they attained resources that weren't available in their own countries. What did they have to do if they didn't have coal in their own country, for example? And the example down here gives you a real-world scenario as to how you might get cereal if you run out in your house. In the late 1800s, Japan entered a period of industrialization also. The Meiji Restoration, 1868 to 1890, was named after the emperor who took the name Meiji, which means enlightened rule. The emperor and a new ruling class decided it was time to remodel Japan on a Western model. The goal was to make Japan a European-style empire that could compete in the increasingly global world. It was an era of conquerors and colonies, and as Hong Kong was absorbed into the British Empire, the Japanese swore Tokyo and Kyoto would never share the same fate. Alright, here's an example of some of the older world Japanese, like the rickshaw here, being changed over to more modern Western modes of transportation. You see a primitive car, here's a train, this is a trolley drawn by horses, etc. 3. What was the name of the Japanese period of industrialization that started in the late 1800s, and why did Japan incorporate the European style? The islands of Japan, for number 4. The islands of Japan, unlike most countries in Europe, did not naturally have the raw materials needed to industrialize further. What do you predict Japan will do to support industrialization? Where will Japan go to acquire those materials they need to industrialize further? Alright, you're going to make some inferences. Japanese geography and the problem with industrialization. Here we see a map showing Japan's expanding empire to 1934. Okay, and the text reads, during the Meiji Restoration, 1868 to 1890, the Japanese studied the political, economic, and social institutions, the Western powers, and selectively adopted certain institutions to meet their needs. For example, they modeled their constitution and government after Western European ones, but gave their emperor more power than European kings had in limited monarchies. They also elevated the status of merchants, a class that had been looked down upon in Japanese society but was respected in the West. A national military and universal conscript were established, and compulsory public education was introduced both to teach the skills needed for the new nation and to teach values of citizenship in all Japanese. Most importantly, the Japanese industrialized during the Meiji Restoration and experienced many of the same effects that England had earlier in the century. Cities grew as more Japanese moved from farming into jobs in factories and offices. In the countryside, larger landlords came to own more and more land, and the number of poor tenants increased. Unlike England, who had an abundance of coal and other natural resources necessary for industrialization, Japan had very few of these raw materials. Instead, the Japanese traded for raw materials to fuel their factories and make their products. In the 1920s, for example, the Japanese traded goods like steel and silk stockings, which were very popular in the United States, for raw materials. The strategy of trading for natural resources worked well for Japan until the Great Depression hit the world in 1929. You will learn more about the Great Depression in a later lesson. As a result of the Great Depression, foreign governments and companies had little money to spend on Japanese goods. Keep in mind the sources are available to you through these links if you want to go and research these texts further. From that text, you're going to answer 5, 6, and 7 in this chart. Also, keywords from the text are down here in the word bank, so if you don't know what universal conscription is, you can read the word bank and it'll tell you that it's the mandatory enlistment in a country's armed forces. See also military draft. So it's essentially a required military draft. Number 5, in terms of access to natural resources, how did Japan differ from England? So you're going to write your answer here. How did Japan, for number 6, how did Japan acquire the natural resources needed for industrialization before the Great Depression? 7, what was the effect of the Great Depression on Japan's ability to trade for raw materials? Okay. We're going to come down to the next page, which is page 6, and we're going to see Imperial Japan. The timeline of Japanese imperialism, right here. You read through the timeline, and then the text that follows. To get the raw materials they needed, the Japanese decided to do what Europeans had started earlier in the century, imperialize. First, the Japanese, with their new industrial strength and modern weapons, renegotiated the unequal treaties they made with the Western nations like the United States, when Commodore Matthew Perry forced them to open up to trade. Then, Japan fought a war against China in 1894 through 95 over the control of Korea and gained Taiwan. Japan's first colony. In 1902, Japan signed an alliance with Great Britain, which signified a dramatic increase in international status. And in 1904 and 1905, Japan won a war against Russia, one of the major Western powers. In the process, Japan expanded its empire, annexing Korea in 1910. Japan was allied with the United States and Britain in World War I and expected territorial gains at the Versailles Peace Conference in 1919. Instead, Japan met with strong opposition from the United States and again learned the lesson that the West regarded imperialism very differently if it was imperialism of an Asian nation rather than a European power. Question 8. In the 1900s, before the Great Depression, how did Japan acquire raw materials for industrialization? Question 9. Which countries/regions did Japan conquer between 1894 and 1940? 10. The text states that after the Versailles Peace Conference, that Japan learned the lesson that the West regarded imperialism very differently if it was the imperialism of an Asian nation rather than a European power. Explain what this means. Question 10 is trying to get you to write about the double standard the West held. Okay, was it okay for the United States and for Britain to be imperialistic in their eyes? Was it okay for Japan to be imperialistic in their eyes? Think about the question and write your answer here. Summarize. Why did Japan become an imperial nation in the 20th century? Okay. Word bank once again for the text if you don't know any of the words. I highly recommend you utilize the word bank, especially for your answers. Page 8. The Manchurian Incident and Japanese Aggression leading up to World War II. The setbacks and insults from abroad combined with an economic depression sowed public frustration with the political leadership in Japan. A group of military leaders stationed in northeastern China, in a region called Manchuria, who were there to protect a Japanese railway, wanted full control over the region. They knew, however, that unprovoked aggression would be condemned by the international community. In 1931, they came up with a plan. On September 18th, they detonated dynamite close to a section of Japanese railway and blamed it on the Chinese. They used the explosion as an excuse to mobilize their army, invade all of Manchuria, and rule the region. 6 months later, Manchuria became Manchukuo, a Japanese territory. The Chinese called on the League of Nations to condemn the act and stop the Japanese, but the League did not act, and the Japanese left the League of Nations. This event showed how weak the League of Nations was and how ineffective it was at peacekeeping after World War I. After the Manchurian incident, the military-industrial machine went into high gear, pulling Japan out of its economic depression as it continued to expand Japanese power across the Far East. As Holland, France, Germany were enveloped in turmoil in Europe, Japan looked to replace them in Asia. Japanese troops invaded China in 1937 and French Indochina in 1940, setting up puppet governments to administer areas too vast to be controlled by the Japanese armies. Western countries, especially the United States, grew concerned over Japan's increased aggression. Okay, here's a picture of the railway. And it looks like we have a circle drawn here in the picture. This photograph of Japanese experts examining the section of railway in Manchuria where military leaders claim the Chinese sabotaged the tracks was printed in a Japanese newspaper soon after the Manchurian incident in 1931. Okay, here you're going to click on this link, or right here, this hyperlink, and you're going to watch this video from start to 6 minutes and 25 seconds. So you don't have to watch past 6 minutes and 25 seconds. And you're going to use the text that was just read and answer the accompanying questions. Western countries, especially the United States, grew concerned over Japan's increased aggression. 12. Based on the video, up to 1 minute and 45 seconds, describe Japan in the 1920s before the Great Depression in 1929. 13. What was the Manchurian incident and why did it happen? 14. What were the effects of the Manchurian incident for the Chinese? For the Japanese? Page 10. Describe the effects of Japanese imperialism on China. All right. We're going to base our answer to question 16 on the map below and on our knowledge of social studies. Growth of the Japanese Empire between 1931 and 1941. So here you see this is Japan and the Japanese Empire. Here. The ones with the lines, Japanese dominated or conquered areas prior to Pearl Harbor. So you can see all the land in China and French Indochina, Hainan here, that the Japanese took over before they attacked Pearl Harbor. And this is unoccupied China. So 16. Based on the information provided by this map, how did the growth of the Japanese Empire affect China? I'm going to choose between these answers. I know one of the bubbles is already clicked, but just leave the bubble on the answer that you think is right, okay? This is not necessarily the right answer, number 4 here, so don't click on that one, just because you think it is. Page 11, the Nanking Massacre. In 1937, the Japanese invaded China, starting the Second Sino-Japanese War. They were successful in taking over most of the eastern coast of China and its major ports. After invading and securing the capital, Nanking, also written Nanjing, an event known as the Nanking Massacre, also called the Rape of Nanking, took place. And it took place in December of 1937, between December 1937 and January 1938. It was a period of mass killing and ravaging of Japanese citizens and surrendered soldiers by soldiers of the Japanese Imperial Army. That read a little confusing, so I'll clarify for you guys. Japanese soldiers in the Imperial Army killed and ravaged many Chinese citizens, even surrendered soldiers in the Chinese army. The number of Chinese killed in the massacre has been subject to much debate, with most estimates ranging from 100,000 to more than 300,000. The destruction of Nanking, which had been the capital of the nationalist Chinese from 1928 to 1937, was ordered by Matsui Iwan, a commanding general of the Central China Front Army that captured the city. Over the next several weeks, Japanese soldiers carried out Matsui's orders, perpetrating numerous mass executions and tens of thousands of rapes. The army looted and burned the surrounding towns of the city, destroying more than a third of its buildings. In 1940, the Japanese made Nanking the capital of their Chinese puppet government, headed by Wang Jingwei, or Wang Jingwei. Shortly after the end of World War II, Matsui and Tani Hisao, a lieutenant general who had personally participated in acts of murder and rape, were found guilty of war crimes by the International Military Tribunal for the Far East and were executed for their crimes. All right, so we can see how merciless the Japanese were when they invaded China, based on that reading. You're going to watch the video, news report from CCTV on the Japanese invasion of China in 1937 and the massacre of Nanking. And then you're going to read the text below and answer the accompanying questions. There's no time limit here, so it's expected that you're going to watch the entire video. First, answer questions 17A, B, C, and D. When did the Nanking Massacre take place? Where did it take place? And don't just write Nanking. All right? Be specific based on the map up here. Who was involved in the Nanking Massacre and what occurred? Question 18. China was a member of the League of Nations in 1937 and an important trade partner with the United States, Great Britain, and other European countries. How might Japan's invasion of China and the Nanking Massacre have affected relations between Japan and the Western powers? So how did the massacre affect how Western powers and Japan felt about each other? 19. How do you think the Nanking Massacre will affect Japanese and Chinese relations later in history? So let's say 20 years down the road, how do you think the Chinese felt about the Japanese after what they did? Useful sentence stems down here. When you're writing your responses, you may write Japan's invasion affected and then finish your thought. Or perhaps Japanese and Chinese history might have been affected by, and continue your thought there. Part 2 for global studies. What was World War II? World War II was a global war that lasted from 1939 to 1945, involving over 30 countries. During the war, 2 opposing military alliances formed, the Allies and the Axis. World War II launched countries into a state of total war, and it became the deadliest conflict in human history, with the loss of an estimated 50 to 85 million lives. Mass death was caused by the Holocaust and the atomic bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Mr. I wants you to watch this video here from the History Channel and answer the questions below. Question 1. Even though World War II began 21 years after the end of World War I, some historians believe that the two wars were part of one vast global conflict. Why do the historians in this clip argue that the wars were connected? Alright, and you're going to take a look at this visual aid showing a bit of a timeline of the start to World War II. Japanese and Italian imperialism. Hitler rearms Germany. German troops occupy the Rhineland. Hitler takes Austria. Hitler takes Czechoslovakia. Hitler conquers Poland, and then the real beginning of World War II. Okay? So these are all the events. Think of them as dominoes falling, leading up to World War II. Down here, we're going to make some predictions. On page 14, unresolved issues from the Treaty of Versailles. So make predictions. How could this cause have led to a world war? Based on what you know about the Treaty of Versailles, how could that have led to a world war? Appeasement. How could this have been a cause that led to World War II? Failures of the League of Nations. How could this have been a cause of the war? Great Depression and the rise of dictatorships. How could this have been a cause of World War II? And finally, Hitler's invasion of Poland. How could this have been a cause that led to World War II, or a world war as they put it in a visual? 1919 through 1939. Unresolved issues of the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was one of the peace treaties at the end of World War I, and it officially ended the war between Germany and the Allied powers. The terms of the Treaty of Versailles was announced in June 1919. Even though German politicians were not consulted about the terms of the treaty, they had very little choice but to sign it. This resulted in many unresolved issues. Germany and its allies were the losers in World War I, and as such were held responsible for all of the destruction and costs. In the Treaty of Versailles, Germany lost territory, was forced to pay huge reparations, payments by a defeated country for the destruction it caused in a war, and was forced to take responsibility for the war through the War Guilt Clause, and forced to demilitarize or greatly reduce their military. After World War I, Germany suffered from economic problems like inflation. This is going to come up later, so pay attention to inflation. And unemployment. And Germany was often unable to meet reparation payments. These problems left many Germans angry at the Treaty of Versailles, which they saw as unfair. Germans were bitter and wanted their overseas and European territories back, as well as freedom to operate as they wished. So you see the reparations here? It's an astronomical number. Okay? Check for understanding. What were the unresolved issues of the Treaty of Versailles? Synthesis. How could the unresolved issues of the Treaty of Versailles have led to the beginning of World War II in 1939? 1920s, the Great Depression and the rise of dictatorships. One major cause of the global Great Depression was the American Wall Street crash of October 1929. America had given the Weimar Republic huge loans in 1924 to help with reparation payments. However, after Wall Street crashed, America needed those loans repaid to assist its troubled economy. Because Germany lost its loans from America, it was unable to make reparation payments. Germany's failure to make reparation payments meant that France and Britain were unable to make their loan payments. Throughout the world, the trade began to slow down and production decreased. The Wall Street crash had ripple effect throughout the world that resulted in a high unemployment through Europe. Unemployment forced many Europeans, especially in Germany, to rely on soup kitchens and other government support. European governments seemed unable to handle the crisis. The traditional approaches to handling economic crises seemed to only cause more problems. With the current governments unable to ease the pain and suffering of unemployment and inflation, Europeans were drawn to totalitarian leaders who promised economic recovery. Totalitarianism is a system of government in which one party tries to rule with complete control over every aspect of the lives of its citizens. There have been a number of totalitarian rulers in history. While they all try to run their totalitarian states with complete control over the people that live in them, they often have different ideologies, beliefs, that guide their decisions. For example, the first totalitarian ruler you learned about, Joseph Stalin, was a communist. He used totalitarianism to make Russia into the first state inspired by Karl Marx's ideas. Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini were other totalitarian rulers influenced by an ideology called fascism. Fascists also wanted complete control over their countries. While these totalitarian leaders in Europe were motivated by different ideologies, they were all deeply nationalistic and militaristic, believing that they needed to fight for the survival and superiority of their nations while building up a strong military that could defeat other nations that may have attempted to take away their power. In Japan, Emperor Hirohito emerged as a nationalist and militaristic leader fixated on overseas expansion. Together, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Emperor Hirohito were all dictators or rulers who have complete control over their countries. These dictators also aggressively sought control over other nations. Here you see an image of the Versailles Treaty. Okay. Check for understanding. What caused the rise of dictators during the interwar period? What was the main focus of these dictators? Synthesis. How could these dictators have caused the beginning of World War II in 1939? Observations based on the political cartoon. What do you see in the political cartoon? You're going to write your answer here. Inferences. What guesses can you make based on the political cartoon? And finally, what is the message of the political cartoon to the people reading it? And if you can't see it too clearly, it shows Hitler's party on the helmet, Versailles Treaty, and you kind of see him crawling out of the Versailles Treaty almost as though he's being birthed by it. Between 1931 and 1939, aggression and failures of the League of Nations. The Treaty of Versailles included the planned formation of the League of Nations, an international forum of an international collective security arrangement. The nations that joined the League of Nations agreed to settle disputes rather than go to war. The League of Nations was set up after World War I to keep peace. However, the U.S. did not join, and other nations were too concerned with their own problems to take on global peace. When an issue of global peace did arise, the League of Nations did not have the power to do anything about it. In the early 1930s, the invasion of Manchuria and Abyssinia, current-day Ethiopia, destroyed people's belief in the ability of the League to stop wars or keep any kind of peace. In both situations, the League acted slowly and made poor decisions about how to suppress aggressive nations. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, a northeastern region of China. The Chinese called the League of Nations to condemn the act and stop the Japanese, but the League did not act, and the Japanese left the League of Nations. In 1935, Italy, under the leadership of fascist leader Benito Mussolini, invaded Abyssinia, current-day Ethiopia, using poison gas. The Ethiopians called the League of Nations to condemn the invasion. Instead, Britain and France signed a secret pact to give Abyssinia to Italy. By 1936, Italy had conquered Abyssinia, and in 1937, Italy left the League. How did the League of Nations respond to the crisis in Manchuria, 1931, and Abyssinia, 1935? While Manchuria and Abyssinia were being invaded, Hitler announced that Germany was leaving the League in 1935. Hitler broke the Treaty of Versailles and started rearming Germany. The League calls a disarmament conference, but it failed and Germany continued to arm. In 1936, in defiance of the League of Nations, Germany began to recapture territories lost under the Treaty of Versailles, including the Rhineland. In 1938, Germany informed the League that in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany and Austria were uniting. Question 8. How did the League of Nations respond to Hitler's violation of the Treaty of Versailles? Page 19. There were many effects of the League of Nations failures. First, small nations soon learned that they could not expect protection from the League of Nations and that aggressive totalitarian states could act without consequence. Second, the League of Nations' inability to act and their slowness made the League appear incompetent, scared, and ineffective because Britain and France knew the League could not stop aggressive nations. I skipped a line. That's why I was confused. Let me start from here, guys, starting from this point. Third, by the 1930s, the four major powers, Japan, Italy, Britain, and France, all betrayed the League's goals. Fourth, because Britain and France knew the League could not stop aggressive nations, they instead followed the policy of appeasement, or giving Hitler what he wanted, to stop Germany from going to war. This policy allowed Hitler to quickly advance with his plans. Question 9. Check for understanding. What was the purpose of the League of Nations after World War I? Question 10. Did the League of Nations meet its goals? Please explain. And please use evidence from the text. Okay? Use evidence from the text in your answer. Synthesis. How could the failures of the League of Nations have led to the beginning of World War II in 1939? Right. Between 1935 and 1939, appeasement. What is appeasement? Why did leaders take this route? In the 1930s, when Britain and France knew the League could not stop aggressive nations, they instead followed the policy of appeasement, or the policy of giving aggressive or enemy nations what they want in order to avoid conflict. The term is most often applied to the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's actions towards Nazi Germany between 1935 and 1939. There are several reasons why several Western democracies like Britain and France appeased Hitler. First, the British were not prepared to go to war and wanted to avoid war at all costs. Additionally, having remembered the slaughter of World War I, many leaders thought another world war would destroy civilization. Finally, some thought that Hitler's complaints and ideas were reasonable. From 1935 until 1938, Britain and France gave Hitler what he wanted, such as land, control over nations, and the freedom to remilitarize, because they assumed that if they gave Hitler what he wanted, he'd eventually stop and war could be avoided. Instead, this policy of appeasement empowered Hitler to want more and take more. The greatest example of this appeasement policy is the Munich Agreement. 12. What is appeasement? 13. Which nations appeased Hitler and Nazi Germany? 14. Why did these nations appease Hitler and Nazi Germany? 15. What do you predict are the dangers of appeasement? What are the possible benefits? Page 21. The road to World War II. Hitler wanted to unite all German-speaking people into the Third Reich, Nazi Germany, and he began on the road to create a living space for German in Eastern Europe. I guess that's supposed to be Germany in Eastern Europe. To create the living wage for Germany, Hitler believed that he could do whatever was necessary. One of the first steps in creating this living space was the Anschluss, or union between Austria and Germany in 1938. Even though the Anschluss violated the Treaty of Versailles, Western democracies did nothing to stop Hitler. Remember appeasement? 16. What did Hitler want? 17. How did he go about getting it? 18a. What did Western democracies do in response to the Anschluss? What message might this send to Hitler? 18b. How is this an example of appeasement? Here you see a picture of Neville Chamberlain shaking Hitler's hand in 1938. Having built confidence that he could not be stopped, Hitler turned to Czechoslovakia. In western Czechoslovakia, there was a region called Sudetenland, where there were German-speaking people he believed needed to be reunited with their German homeland. Britain and France were not willing to go to war, so a deal was reached on September 30th between Adolf Hitler, Neville Chamberlain, Benito Mussolini, and Eduardo Daladier in France, called the Munich Agreement. The Munich Agreement permitted German annexation of Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland. Czechoslovakia was informed by Britain and France that they could either fight Germany alone or surrender to Germany. The Czechoslovakian government agreed to abide by the agreement because they knew they could not fight Hitler alone, since Britain and France were unwilling to help them fight. The settlement gave Germany the Sudetenland and control over the rest of Czechoslovakia, as long as Hitler promised to go no further. Here's a map showing Germany's acquired lands based on appeasement. 19. Based on the information provided by this map, how did adopting the policy of appeasement at the Munich Conference on September 1938 change Europe? So what were the major changes? You can see the shaded areas, dark shaded areas are where Germany was the aggressor. Okay. After signing the Munich Agreement, Chamberlain returned to Britain and announced, "My good friends, for the second time in our history, a British Prime Minister has returned from Germany, bringing peace with honor. I believe it is peace for our time." Here you see the picture of him getting off the plane. These crowds of people seem pretty happy with him. Question 20. Why do you think Chamberlain was so excited after the Munich Agreement? How might other nations have felt about the Munich Agreement, and why? 21. If you were Chamberlain, would you have signed the Munich Agreement? Explain. Basically, this question is asking, would you have trusted Hitler? And answer honestly. Some people might have. Some people might not have. However, Winston Churchill, a British statesman and staunch opponent of Chamberlain's appeasement of Adolf Hitler, delivered a speech to the House of Commons in October 1938, where he stated, "I will therefore begin by saying the most unpopular and most unwelcome thing. I will begin by saying that everybody would like to ignore or forget, but which must nevertheless be stated, namely, that we have sustained a total and unmitigated defeat, and that France has suffered even more than we have. I venture to think that in the future the Czechoslovakian state cannot be maintained as an independent entity. You will find that in a period of time which may be measured by years, but may be measured by only months, Czechoslovakia will be engulfed in the Nazi regime. We are in the presence of a disaster of the first magnitude which has befallen Great Britain and France. Do not let us blind ourselves to that. It must now be accepted that all the countries of Central and Eastern Europe will make the best terms they can with the triumphant Nazi power. The system of alliances in Central Europe upon which France has relied for her safety has been swept away, and I can see no means by which it can be reconstituted. This is only the beginning of the reckoning. This is only the first sip, the first foretaste of a bitter cup, which will be proffered to us year by year unless by a supreme recovery of moral health and martial vigor we arise again to take our stand for freedom as in the olden time." Question 22. What did Winston Churchill fear the impact of the Munich Agreement would be? Use his speech to answer the question. Here you see the political cartoon, Stepping Stones of Glory. It says Boss of the Universe on the top. Exclamation points, question marks, Danzig, Rhineland fortification, rearmament, and you can just see Hitler walking up these steps made out of people. Spineless leaders of democracy, it says. So you're going to write your observations, inferences, and what is the message of this political cartoon. Another political cartoon here shows Chamberlain being portrayed as a chambermaid, telling Europe, being portrayed as another chambermaid, to be quiet, as Hitler, portrayed as a baby, is drinking a bottle labeled the Munich Agreement, and he's in a bassinet going to take a nap. And it says, "Shh, he'll be quiet now, maybe." So, observations from the political cartoon, inferences, and what is the message of this political cartoon. Number 25 is one of my favorite political cartoons. It's from Dr. Seuss. Remember, one more lollipop and then you all go home. And you see all of the monsters coming out of the water have swastikas, the symbol of Nazi Germany on them. Okay? And you're going to write down, it says the appeaser in the middle here if you can't read that. It's very blurry. The appeaser in the middle. You're going to write your observations, inferences, and what is the message of the political cartoon. September 1st, 1939. Hitler invades Poland and World War II begins. Alliances form. Many nations realized that after the annexation of Sudetenland, Poland would be Hitler's next target. In April 1939, Russia, Britain, France met to form an alliance to defend Poland. The Allies thought that Hitler would not invade Poland if it instigated a war with Russia. By August 1939, Russia changed its mind and left the alliance with France and Britain. In August 1939, Hitler and his enemy Joseph Stalin, the Soviet-Russian dictator, signed the Nazi-Soviet Pact, a non-aggression pact that publicly stated that the rival nations would maintain peaceful relations. This pact was surprising to the world because Hitler and Stalin had dramatically different ideologies. Even though these dictators did not like one another, they used each other for political ends. Secretly, this pact also said that they would invade Poland and split it between them. Here you have another political cartoon showing Stalin as a beautiful blushing bride here, a great mustache on that bride. Then you have Hitler on the left, and it looks like a marriage photo. All right, observations, inferences, and what is the message of this political cartoon? Page 27. Question 27. After Sudetenland, what was Hitler's next target? How did Russia, Britain, and France respond? 28. What was the Nazi-Soviet pact, and why was the Nazi-Soviet pact surprising? 29. What is the secret agreement in the Nazi-Soviet pact? And 30. What does this secret agreement reveal about appeasement and Chamberlain's argument that the Munich Agreement would bring peace for our time? Page 28. World War II begins. On September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. Only 2 days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany, and World War II officially began. Nazis stormed Poland with the power of the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. The theory of the Blitzkrieg was to defeat opponents using a series of short military campaigns. These military campaigns made use of tanks, planes, and artillery to quickly attack opponents. These quick attacks would disorganize and shock opponents, making them more vulnerable. While Germany attacked Poland from the west, Stalin and the Soviet Union attacked from the east, annexing land promised under the secret parts of the Nazi-Soviet pact. Within a month, Poland no longer existed as an independent country, and instead became absorbed under Hitler and Stalin's dictatorships. Question 31. Which country did Hitler invade on September 1st, 1939, and how did Britain and France react? Number 32. What is Blitzkrieg? Why was it a successful military tactic? Under here you have images of the German invasion of Poland. This is an image from an aircraft. You can see, let's see what kind of airplane it was. The bow pulpit of a Henkel Hay 111, and he's a gunner machine gun. Here you see the tanks coming through the streets and cheering people. This is the evidence of the bombing. You can see the buildings on fire here. Here's fighter planes flying in formation, soldiers from the Panzer Division. Okay, question 33. How did Poland's location make the country particularly vulnerable to attack by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union? So you can see the Soviet Union here on the east, Greater Germany on the west. All right, so answer your questions based on the map here. When you're done, you're going to watch the Discovery Channel video on World War II up to the 9-minute mark. You don't have to watch the whole video, just up to 9 minutes. Use this link or the play button to open the video, and you're going to answer question 34. How did Hitler justify his attack of Poland? 35. Why did Britain and France declare war on Hitler after the invasion of Poland? 36. What advantages did the German military have? 37. What was Poland's military like? 38. Which other country invaded Poland and why? Kind of know that one already. 39. After Poland surrendered, what did Germans begin to do to Jewish people? Down here we see a few more images from the news. Hitler invades Poland, and here you see the German troops marching in formation. Check for understanding. Question 40. What happened on September 1st in 1939, and why did it happen? Synthesis. How did this event lead to the beginning of World War II in 1939? Consider Poland's agreement with two other countries that were named earlier, guys. Give you that hint, okay? Down here we have another synthesis question with a Venn diagram. How were the causes of World War I similar or different from the causes of World War II? So you're going to complete the Venn diagram using the word bank below, the causes here. So if you believe imperialism caused both, you're going to type imperialism in the corresponding spot where you believe it should be, or handwrite it, okay? Same for all of the other answers, and if you feel that it's not imperialism, or imperialism should just be on causes of World War I, you'd put it just on the left. Just World War II, you'd put it on the right. You're going to have to use your keyboard here a little bit, using the space bar to move it around, but it'll work for you, okay? That's how you do the Venn diagram on page 32. Now you have a formative writing task, which is, using your knowledge of global history, write a response in which you identify 5 causes of World War II, and explain how these causes led to World War II. All right, you're going to type your response here. Want to make sure that you know that you should be using evidence from the previous 32 pages in this answer. Okay, you can cite your evidence by putting in the citation page 12, for example. All right. After you're done with your writing task, Mr. I has a multiple choice assessment for you. You're going to read the questions. and answer them using the bubbles. Okay? Using the bubbles. Alright, I'm just going to make sure that it's not bubbled in. Number 1, which event occurred first and led to the other 3? Was it the rise of fascism in Europe? Was it the Bolshevik Revolution? Was it World War I? Was it signing of the Treaty of Versailles? Question 2, one major reason the League of Nations failed was that it was not included in the Versailles Treaty, was controlled by communist Russia, frightened many nations with its large military force, or lacked the support of many of the major world powers during the crisis. Question 3, which term is defined as payment for damages? Mandate, armistice, reparation, or militarism? Question 4, in Europe during the 1930s, economic instability led to the rise of fascist dictatorships, development of nuclear arms, abandonment of colonial territories, or establishment of the League of Nations? Question 5, it's down there on this page, so I'll go back up. Which newspaper headline illustrates a policy of appeasement? Dien Bien Phu falls, French to leave Vietnam. Chamberlain agrees to German demand Sudetenland to Germany. Marshall Plan proposes economic aid program for Europe. Or Soviet troops and tanks crush Hungarian revolt. We go up to question 6. Which agreement was labeled by the Nazis as unfair to Germany? The Treaty of Versailles, the Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, the Munich Pact, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Sorry about my East German accent, doesn't work too well. Which development occurred in Germany as a result of the terms imposed by the Treaty of Versailles? Soviet occupation, political instability, overseas expansion, or economic prosperity? One way in which the Treaty of Nanking and the Treaty of Versailles are similar is that in both treaties the provisions called for monarchs to be returned to their rightful places, reparations to be paid by defeated countries, existing borders to be maintained, or peacekeeping organizations to be established. Question 9. The Treaty of Versailles angered many Germans after World War I because the treaty divided Germany into communist and non-communist zones, made Germany restore its emperor, required all German-speaking Europeans to return to Germany, forced Germany to pay large war reparations. Choose your answer there. Question 10. The policy of appeasement helped cause the World War II because this policy reduced the armaments of major European powers, gave too much power to the United Nations, increased sea trade between England and the United States, or allowed the aggressive actions of Germany to go unchecked. Question 11. Base your answers to the following questions on the passage below and your knowledge of social studies. It took the Big Four just 5 hours and 25 minutes here in Munich today to dispel the clouds of war and come to an agreement over the partition of Czechoslovakia. There is to be no European war after all. There is to be peace, and the price of that peace is roughly the ceding by Czechoslovakia of the Sudeten territory to Herr Hitler's Germany. The German Führer gets what he wanted, only he has to wait a little longer for it. Not much longer though, only 10 days. Policy that France, Britain, and Italy chose to follow at this meeting is known as appeasement, self-determination, liberation, or pacification. Question 13 shows this step chart here. Based on the information provided by the diagram, which statement is a valid conclusion about the 1930s? So it shows you the different events of 1930, Germany, Japan, Italy, etc., what they're doing. You're going to read this one on your own, guys. Based on the information provided by the diagram, which statement is a valid conclusion about the 1930s? The United States led international peacekeeping efforts. Aggression led to the start of World War II. The actions of Italy, Germany, and Japan united Europe. Or economic and social upheaval led to the rise of democracy in Asia. That ends your global studies portion. Now we're going to start on forensics. The objectives: to understand how the science of forensics, criminology, was used during the early 20th century in times of war. Prediction. First, your definition of forensics is the science and practice of examining physical evidence and applying that evidence to the resolution of legal issues, particularly identifying the commission, nature, and perpetrators of crimes. Directions. Choose 2 of these scientific contributions to forensics and describe how they could be used during wartime. So you're going to choose between 1 through 8 these scientific contributions that were prior to World War II, forensics criminology came a long way. Some dramatic strides included the invention of the microscope. So you're going to describe how that could be used during wartime, the microscope, for forensics. Autopsies to determine the cause of death. Detection of arsenic in the dead. Chemical toxicology and specimen analysis. Bullet murder, weapon identification. Defined fingerprint patterns to identify criminal activity. Every contact leaves a physical trace theory. And ABO blood typing. Blood typing was made in 1931. I just learned something today. All right, you're going to choose 2 of these and explain how they could be used for forensics during World War II. Then, you're going to read one outcome of these forensic developments was used by the American military. The Army, Navy, and Marines began using fingerprinting in 1905. The FBI began cataloging fingerprints in 1924. It wasn't until 1940 through 1942 that the military used blood typing and blood banks during World War II. You're going to watch this video, click this link, and find out what happened to all the lost souls of war. All right? Then you're going to write in the reflection and answer the question, what did President Theodore Roosevelt mean when he said, "Where the tree falls, let it lie," in 1938? You see the amount of space you have here? Miss Cindy and Miss Lucido are expecting a well-detailed answer with evidence from the video, from this text, and from up here. So keep that in mind, all right? Don't just write one sentence. Write a couple of paragraphs. War crime forensics. Forensics techniques for human identification as well as crime scene investigation protocols are also applied to the investigation of war crimes. If you click the link here, it brings you to the encyclopedia that gives you the definition. They aid with assessing the burden of proof against individuals before both national and international courts. These techniques are essential in gathering physical evidence for the indictment, arrest, and prosecution of war criminals, and to the localization and identification of people who disappeared in times of war. The Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907 established that the laws and customs of war, and defined what qualified as war crimes. The use of poisonous weapons, wanton destruction of cities without military necessity, attacks on religious and cultural institutions, attacks of undefended civilian communities, and looting of public or private property are among war crimes defined by the Hague Convention. The International Military Tribunal, created in 1945, further defined war crimes in its Nuremberg Charter to include executions of captured military personnel or civilians without a judicial process, murder or ill treatment of prisoners of war, deportation of civilians from occupied territories, killing of hostages, and any kind of devastation unjustified as military strategic necessity. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 included for the first time a list of serious offenses in times of war for which individual offenders should be criminally accountable. The Geneva Conventions describe the ethics to be followed by all military forces in relation to the 1. Wounded and sick on land, 2. Wounded and sick at sea, 3. Prisoners of war, and 4. Civilians in occupied territories. The Geneva Convention described other serious offenses liable for punishment under international law, including torture or inhumane treatment, unethical medical experimentation on prisoners, willful killings, willful inflicting of unnecessary suffering, slave labor, deprivation or injury to body or health, the extensive destruction or the unlawful arbitrary appropriation of property not justified by military necessity, forcing a prisoner of war or a civilian to serve in the forces of a hostile army, denial of fair and regular trial to prisoners of war or civilians, and the taking of hostages. Remember, all of these terms that are highlighted here, you can find, or maybe not all of them actually, most of them, you can find by using the links that are provided, okay? Using the context from the readings or by researching the words on the internet, please fill in the definition for each word in the word bank. So you're going to look up the definitions. Some of them you can come up here and click on the hyperlink, and you're going to fill in the definitions using the word bank. Okay? Type them out. Do not copy and paste them. Type them out in your own words if you can. All right? Do not copy and paste them. You will not learn anything if you copy and paste them. Page 40. ELA, English Language Arts. Objectives: to understand the fears and actions of the leaders at the onset of World War II. So we're going to read Winston Churchill's speech, Blood, Toil, Tears, and Sweat, and answer the questions that follow below. Mr. Speaker. This is Winston Churchill speaking now. Last Friday evening, His Majesty the King requested that I form a new administration. It was the desire of Parliament and the nation that this administration should be broad and it should include all parties, both of those who supported the past government and also the parties of the opposition to the past government. I have completed the most important part of this task. A war cabinet has been formed of 5 members, including the Liberal opposition. This cabinet represents the unity of the nation. The 3 party leaders have agreed to serve either in war cabinet or in high executive office. The 3 fighting service positions have been filled. It was necessary that all this should be done in one single day on account of the extreme urgency and difficulty of events. A number of other key positions were filled yesterday, and I am submitting a further list to His Majesty tonight. I hope to complete the appointment of the principal ministers tomorrow. The appointment of the other ministers usually takes a little longer, but I trust that when Parliament meets again, this part of my task will be completed and that the administration will be complete in all respects. Sir, I consider it in the public interest to suggest that the House should be summoned to meet today. Mr. Speaker agreed and took the necessary steps in accordance with the powers given to him by the resolution of the House. At the end of the proceedings today, the adjournment of the House will be proposed until resuming on Tuesday, the 21st of May. We may, of course, meet earlier if need be. The business to be considered during that week will be told to members at the earliest opportunity. I now invite the House, by the resolution which I presented to you, to record its approval of the steps taken and to declare its confidence in the new government. Sir, to form an administration of this scale and complexity is a serious undertaking in itself, but it must be remembered that we are in the early stage of one of the greatest battles in history, that we are in action at many points in Norway and in Holland, and that we have to be prepared in the Mediterranean, that the air battle is continuous, and that many preparations have to be made here at home. In this crisis, I hope I may be pardoned if I do not address the House at any length today. I hope that any of my friends and colleagues, or former colleagues, who are affected by the political reconstruction will forgive the lack of formality. I would say to the House, as I said to those who have joined the government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most serious kind. We have before us many long months of struggle and suffering. You ask, what is our policy? I will say, it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all our might and all our strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny, the likes of which has never been seen in the dark and regrettable history of human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word: victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival. Let that be realized. Otherwise, there is no survival for the British Empire. No survival for all that the British Empire has stood for. No survival for the urge and impulse of the ages that mankind will move forward towards its goal. But I take up my task with the buoyancy and hope. I feel sure that our cause will not be permitted to fail among men. At this time, I feel entitled to claim the aid of all, and I say, come then, let us go forward together with our united strength. The word bank here: administration, broad, urgency, and formality, if you don't know those words. Page 42, question 1. Explain Churchill's policy, lines 25 through 27, to deal with Hitler's military actions in Europe. Do you think this use of rhetoric is effective? Why or why not? If you don't know what rhetoric means, it's down here in the word bank. It's a necessary English term. You'll see it a lot more in 11th grade, but it means the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing. Explain, number 2, explain Churchill's statement. We are in action at many points, line 18. What does he mean by this statement, and what does it imply about Britain's situation at that point in the war? Imply, once again, a necessary English term to suggest something without saying or showing it plainly. 3. Victory at all costs. Based on lines 27 through 30, Churchill telling Parliament there will be a consequence if Britain fails to win the war. What is the consequence, and do you feel Churchill does a good job of explaining how dire their situation is? On page 43, using Churchill's statement in lines 31 through 32 to guide you, explain what entitled to claim the aid of all means, and make an educated guess as to who Churchill would call upon for help in fighting off the German advance westward. All right, down here's a guide, PEAL guide. PEAL stands for point, evidence and explanation, evaluation, and link. So if you want to write an effective paragraph, first you're going to put down your point. Your main point is your interpretation of Churchill's quote, and two, which country you think will assist him. Okay? Evidence and explanation, you're going to use quotes from the speech as evidence, or you can go into Mr. I's global assignment to support your ideas. I need to see evidence in here to give you full credit, okay? You can cite your page numbers. Evaluation, you will explain your evidence and why it makes your point valid. And link, conclude your paragraph by explaining how this may help Britain to not lose the war. Page 44, we have famous quotes from the war. The arrows help you to see who quoted, all right, who's being quoted here, and we have Adolf Hitler without a quote. And you're going to write down which one of these three, Anne Frank, FDR, or Winston Churchill, wrote your favorite quote and why. Page 45, we have math. Objective, to understand the effects of the Great Depression, currency inflation, and how they were precursors to World War II. Remember, the precursor is one of the causes of World War II, so we know that currency inflation caused major issues for Germany during the Great Depression time period and after. All right, so we're going to learn about how that affected the causes of World War II. Weekly wages earned during the Great Depression versus today. Occupation, manufacturing worker, cook, doctor, and accountant. And you can see in the Great Depression, a manufacturing worker would take home $16.89 a week, whereas today they take home $915.75. Cook, same idea, $15 a week compared to $530.40 a week. Doctor, $61.11, and today a doctor would make $2,488 a week. Accountants would make $45 a week. Today they make $1,355.75 a week. So based on the table above, do you think it is easier to live today or in the 1930s, and why? I'm going to give you a hint. This is a trick question. Write down your answer to the best of your ability, okay? Then Mr. Colvin wants you to use the table below, which gives common grocery items and their respective prices during the Great Depression. Using the internet or grocery circulars, those are the newspapers you get. They usually are in a plastic bag at the top of the driveway. Using those, find the prices of each item today. So you're going to go through this list and find the prices. Lamb per pound, baked ham per pound. You're going to put the prices here. Okay, from this list, create a weekly shopping list and calculate the total cost in the Great Depression versus today's cost. So, this is the price per Great Depression. It was 17 cents for a pound of lamb during the Great Depression. You're going to find today's price. You're going to write down how many you would purchase, and then you're going to total the price for the Great Depression and total the price for today. All right? You're going to do this for the entire table, and then you're going to add up the costs here for price today, here for number purchased. You're going to add up total price during the Great Depression, add that up, and you're going to add up the total price today it would cost to buy all these items every week. Okay? Directions. Complete the table activity by creating percentages from the cost of the groceries on page 46 and the table below. To calculate a percentage, divide the part by the whole and multiply by 100. Okay? For your total weekly grocery list cost, fill in the tables below to calculate what percentage of your weekly income your grocery cost would account for. So weekly grocery cost divided by weekly salary. Then we're going to multiply that by 100 to find the percentage. We're going to round to the nearest tenth, one decimal place. So, manufacturing worker, weekly grocery cost, cook, doctor, and accountant. This is all for the Great Depression. And then percentage of salary after your calculations. You're being required to show your work down here. Mr. Colvin wanted me to remind you that if you are going to have trouble typing out your work here, because I know you're going to be using symbols and it's not really normal to type out math, handwrite your work. Take a picture and submit it on Schoology along with this packet, and we'll have your work to see, okay? You can still put your final products typed up here, and you can handwrite your work and submit it. Just take a picture with your phone and upload it to Schoology. Directions for present day are the exact same. You're going to calculate a percentage, divide the part by the whole, and multiply by 100. For your total weekly grocery costs, fill in the tables below and calculate what percentage of your weekly income your grocery cost would account for. Okay, and reminder, that's weekly grocery cost divided by weekly salary, and multiply this decimal by 100 and round to the nearest tenth. So, what's the weekly grocery cost present day of a manufacturing worker, cook, doctor, and accountant? And then what's the percentage of the daily salary? All right. What's the percentage of the daily salary? Same rule applies for showing your work. If you don't want to type it, if it's difficult, handwrite it, take a picture, and upload it. Okay, pay attention to the percentage of salary. That's going to be an interesting number on both the Great Depression and present day. Then Mr. Colvin would like you to do a written response. Look at the percentage of salary column that you calculated in your two tables above. What can be said when comparing the percentages from the Great Depression to those percentages you calculated based on the present day salaries? Use the bullet points to guide your writing. Which era has a larger percentage of their salary taken up by the cost of groceries? Has the percentage spent on groceries gotten larger or smaller over time? How do you think this percentage affected the lives of the people living in both areas? All right, and when you're done with that, review your work and then submit it on Schoology. Okay? Any questions you might have for any specific questions on global, forensics, ELA, math? Write down the numbers and make sure you talk to us about it at our Zoom meeting on Tuesday at 12 o'clock or Thursday at 12 o'clock. All right, everybody, and remember to utilize your reader if you need it. The read aloud function works very well with Adobe, the PDF reader, and good luck. Talk to you soon. Bye.